Thanks very much for coming. My name's John. This is Duncan. I'm going to run through some photos. Duncan's going to talk more about his techniques, the equipment that he uses, and how he gets the desired effect that he does, and your passion in regards to landscapes, portraiture, sport photography. I think you do pretty much everything, Duncan. So thank you very much for coming along. So we'll crack on. So Duncan, tell me about this one.
This is typical of the landscape work that I enjoy. Autumn's a great time of the year. It's a day with intermittent light, a lot of cloud cover as you can see, but then when the clouds part and let the light through, it really does bring out lovely colours. And then composition, with the lead in of the river, the pine trees on the left and the autumn colours on the right, it tied together quite nicely. And that was up in Glen Torridon. The next shot was also in Glen Torridon, and while the lighting conditions are similar, here the composition irritates me quite pronouncedly, quite badly. I just don't like the way the colour is all on the left hand side there. It's unbalanced in that respect. Now, I haven't quite perfected walking in water, but if I could have done, I'd have moved out to the left in order to get that clump of sunlit grasses more over to the right hand side, and it brought that in a better balance of colour. You'll pass up opportunities and you make the best of what you can at any given location. That's the principle in which I work. If you're looking for perfection, you'll rarely find in landscape photography that everything just falls into the perfect position. I use telephoto lenses quite a lot in my landscape work. If you read magazines and the advice of a lot of the top professional landscape photographers, it's all about wide angle lenses. And they're great provided you take the right approach, which I'll come to shortly. But long telephoto lenses have the ability to home in on smaller details and to pull distant mountains into the picture a bit more so they become more dominant. Now you shoot Ben Nevis from Corpach with a 16mm lens and it becomes a molehill. You put on a medium telephoto lens and you pull it into the picture, it becomes much bigger and becomes a more prominent feature in the composition. And this is another example in over in Skye in Glen Sligahan, where with a 70 to 400mm lens, I've really just homed in on the mountains themselves. I've sacrificed the foreground, the middle distance, and just gone for the play of light on the mountains. The fact there were nice cloud shadows there as well, that wasn't all even illuminated, did add something to the interest, I thought. As indeed the next one, similar sort of interplay of light and shade, but here I've used a wide angle lens because of something that I identified as being meaningful in the foreground, and that was these clump of sedges just at the edge of the water. And compositionally they served a very useful purpose. Take them away and you're left with an empty area of water. I used the Alpha 900 and the 24 to 70 Carl Zeiss lens is the one I make most frequent use of.
Which we've got here.
And it's a great lens, but it's quite a limited focal length. If you're using one of the APS size sensors, then something like the 24 to 105, gives you this extended focal range, which is ideal. So I'll probably have more lens changes than I used to have. So I use the 24-70 and 70 to 400. As I'll tell you shortly, I also always carry a macro lens for getting close into small details. So I don't carry a huge amount of equipment. Oh, sorry, I forgot I've got the 16 to 35 Carl Zeiss as well. And if you carry all them, then it's quite a lot. Filters, I still make a good use of them, particularly neutral density grads and also polarizing filter. I don't bother with any others. None of the gimmicky filters. And certainly not warm-up filters, which are now obsolete with digital. In a case like this, I possibly had a neutral density grad just on the sky there, just to darken it down slightly.
How far would it have come down?
I would use it at an angle, coming in from the top top left-hand corner there, coming in at just a slight angle, just to add that wee bit extra density to the bright area of sky. The danger that the mistake most people make with neutral density grads is to push it down too far when it's not necessary. And if I pushed that down too far in the previous image, then it would have shown up, it would have darkened the hill unduly, and you're better not to overcook something. I'm told that same applies in the kitchen as well, but I'm no expert there. Now this is where a wide angle lens really comes into its own. If you get something which is interesting in the foreground, something which is prominent. Here I don't mind the hills in the distance being pushed away into the distance, because the picture is more about the immediate foreground. And these lovely ridges of sand which have been left by the falling tide, the Isle of Harris, the Outer Hebrides, the evening light, and of course the light being low, the sun being low in the sky, was giving this sort of oblique lighting which has emphasised the contours of the ridges, and so you get this interplay of light and shade again. Another wide angle lens shot. This was with the Alpha, 11 to 18 millimetre lens on the Alpha 100, which was Sony's first digital camera, and a bleak day on the Isle of Egg, and it had been drizzling. You can see the light is totally flat, but looking around for interesting subject matter, and here it was just the patterns of on the sand which just made a foreground, and the wide angle lens I've been able to emphasise that and made that the key aspect of the image. Now that's on the same beach, and it just shows how you can go back to the same location time and time again, and in different lighting conditions get a totally different mood. This was about 5 o'clock in the morning. The sun had just come up and was catching the mountains on Rum. Not as brightly lit as I'd hoped for, because I was waiting for the sun to come up. I knew what I was going to caption this picture. It's going to be red rum, and into horse racing we'll get that one. But it was a fairly gentle glow, but it contrasts quite nicely with the very cold shadows, shade in the sand. I used about 5 stops of neutral density grads there to balance up the exposure. Shot straight, there'd been exposing for the sky, there'd been a total lack of detail in the sand. And so by using a neutral density grads down to about here and staggered, you know, one down to there, and next one further down, then you've been able to balance up the exposure to give you the image you see there.
So do you have some sort of special adapter holder to handle them all?
Yes, and they just slide into the multi-adapter holder, and you can just push them in, you can stack them. I never think it's a good idea to, you know, with high quality lenses, to then stick bits of plastic, even though they're made by Lee filters and cost them about 60 quid each. I never think it's, you know, does anything for the quality of the image. So where you can get away with it, I would always shoot without anything in front of the, you know, a quality optic. Very much an abstract. This is my telephoto again, probably about 180mm, the Pasabranga. Fairly calm, but just with enough movement in the water. Possibly helped by I gave this about 1/4 of a second, I think.
Yep.
So it's actually given this distortion in the water rather than having perfect reflections, and I think that makes it more interesting. I also broke the rules here by having the shoreline right across the middle. And then if you've been in camera clubs will know you often get slated. Oh yeah, see. You've heard it all before, haven't you? But that's what fitted this particular scene. So go with it.
Sometimes rules are made to be broken, weren't they?
Yes, and if you've considered where to put that shoreline or that horizon, then you've done your job. You don't have to do what the books say every single time. And what I liked about this, or what attracted me to it, were these sort of, you know, the oblique lines, almost like chevrons going right across the picture. So it's a sort of pattern texture image. This looks as if it's been heavily photoshopped, but it wasn't. I always like to take advantage of the weather conditions. There's no such thing as bad weather. The only thing I don't like is heavy rain and driving wind. The combination of wind and rain makes it very difficult to work.
It's like what Billy Connolly says, there's no such thing as bad weather, it's the bad choice of clothes.
Yes, and the trouble is, in photography, is keeping the water off the front of your lens. Raindrops can totally, you know, spoil any image. This was a very windy day. It was very poor lighting conditions. I think I may have put a polarising filter on just to reduce the shutter speed a little, but it was a 6-second exposure, and I've picked up the movement in the trees. And it was strange how as you just stood and watched this scene, The rowan tree with the berries was relatively static, while the wind tended to swirl and eddy round about, creating a lot of movement in the birch trees. And so it's just a totally natural shot. Give that to a camera club, judging right away they'd be telling them it'd be too heavy in the Gaussian blur in the background. And what do you do in Mull? One of the staff here was telling me he was going to Mull next week.
Bobby, there he is.
What do you do, Bobby? Now, drizzly day in Mull? There you are. You just used to struggle. You know, you think, what can I do here? And you look for foregrounds. Low tide, exposed patches of seaweed giving colour, and then you look for bits that have got a shape. Like the big part in the foreground here sort of draws the eye into the image. And then when the mist just dipped slightly and revealed the mountain top behind, then it just sort of completed the composition. The seaweed's almost pointing in the direction of the mountain. Of course, if you take fiddler and take too long to set your picture up, you'll find the mountain has disappeared again in the cloud. So I'm never put off by bad weather. There's always something you can do. And even though you can't get it right at the time of taking, then Photoshop and other bits of software can, you know, if you get something sharp and with detail in it to start off with, then you can greatly enhance that subsequently.
So you're shooting in RAW or JPEG?
I shoot RAW plus JPEG, and my reason for that is that the JPEG is immediately usable, and it also gives a very good reference point. I find the JPEGs that I get sort of remind me of the film, you know, the transparency of the slide that I would get. You then go and process the RAW file, and then compare it with the JPEG that's come off the camera, and if they're both, you know, equally good, then I'm quite happy. But many a time I've processed a RAW file and then compared it with the JPEG, and I thought, rubbish, you know. So I had to go back and do it again. So it gives a reference point. You may not use it, and I know one of the members here tonight, he does the same and shoots RAW plus JPEG. Takes up a bit more memory in your card, but it's a useful reference point. And I find the Sony does a lot of good in-camera processing, very good JPEGs. And I've had many an image published just straight from the JPEG. So something to consider. And, I've still got some RAW images, and I cannot get anything approaching the JPEG. That may be my limitations with Photoshop, but there are times where the camera does have...
I doubt you're more limited than me. I can
Anyway,
spell it.
utilising the weather conditions again. Month of May, early spring up in the North Islands, still snow in the hills, and I like atmospheric conditions like this. You can't order these things, you've just to go out and in anticipation, and then take advantage of what comes your way. Rocks. Those of you who know my landscape work know that rocks feature quite prominently. Give me some rock and I'm really quite happy. Big lump in the foreground. This is at Old Shore Moor up in Sutherland. Maytime again. A drizzly day in Orkney and Rackwick Bay. More rocks, wide angle lens. Down low, getting in close to them, giving the viewpoint that you see in that image there. Are just three erratic boulders, quite nicely lit with warm light from a setting sun, not overly strong light, and so it's not too contrasty, and a viewpoint which just separates them out, including the ones which are slightly more distant. You can see are not touching the top of that third of the large boulders. The apex of it is nicely positioned between the two. But looking for rocks, they can be a really strong feature in a composition.
Do you ever use flash?
No, I don't. I've never done that. It can be done, it can be very effective, but the thing you have to watch is not to overdo it. And I suppose nowadays with Photoshop there's less need to resort to that possibly than at one time.
Yep. You put that there, Photoshop?
No, I didn't. I don't run up mountains and I don't move rocks that size, because that's quite a big boulder. That was with a 16 to 35mm lens, probably about 16mm. Stop down to give maximum depth of field, and a low viewpoint which places the rock against the sky. I just find there are so many different things you can do with rocks, the way in which they vary in shape and colour and textures. Just carry on, John.
Yeah.
It's,
I take it that previous one you called a balanced composition.
a balanced composition. The varying their shapes, and when I came across this one, I just thought it looked like a monkey face or a coconut. This was actually taken in a workshop that I ran in the Isle of Egg, and I couldn't. The rest of the group weren't interested in it, and I showed it to one of the group who was shooting large format digital.
Wow,
Phase
lot
one,
of
a lot of
money.
money. And he was highly intrigued by it, and he photographed it. You know, he sold 2 of these to some archive gallery collection in America for $60,000. And that showed them it. But even more funnier than that is the rest of them, you couldn't even see a picture there. But anyway, I'd say rocks just have a fascination, so many ways in which you can photograph them. That's a reflection in a quarry in the Isle of, again, Bobby, that's in the Isle of Mull. It's a nice spot. I'll tell you about it if you want. It's one of the old granite quarries, and the rock face was lit by the evening sun and reflecting in the water, which is picking up the reflections from the sky. So you have this lovely contrast of warm colours, the orange and the blue. This was taken in Kirkcaldy. It's not the kind of place you go looking for landscape pictures, but wandering around along the shore, just looking at the rocks, and you begin to see shapes. And you don't have to be anything stronger than black coffee to see things like this. But I could see a face there with a big nose. And you'd all the lines, the textures, the colours, and I just thought it made an interesting semi-abstract composition. I say semi-abstract because I made it less abstract by including some of the pebbles at the bottom. And that was a deliberate choice that I made. But this was with a macro lens, and the next one too, I think, was also with a macro lens. No, sorry, that was a short zoom, the 16 to 80 Carroll's Ice. Focuses quite closely, and this was in the Isle of Mull. No, sorry, it was Iona. Some of the Iona marble, beautiful colours, particularly when it's wet. That was with a macro lens. In Ballahooly Slate Quarry, that is just a piece of slate. And if you crawl about Ballahooly Slate Quarry on your hands and knees, apart from getting funny looks, you'll find some wonderful detailed images. And the angle of view here just brings up the iridescence there, and it just looked like a rainbow on the rock. And that's why I never like to go out without a macro lens when I'm doing landscape photography, because there is so much small detail there that can make an image, and particularly so in days when it's maybe dull and unexciting for the wider panoramic or vista image.
What macro lens is it you use? Is it the 100mm?
It's 100mm, it's a Minolta one, but essentially it's the same design as the Sony one. This is also rock on a cliff top in Orkney, and it just looks like something man-made, but just the textures and the weave of the rock. The sort of contrast too between the upper segment and the lower segment, with that dividing line between them, the touch of blue, and I say I can wander around in that cliff top and spend hours just looking for small details like that. Back to the sort of more vista type image. You think a fence is going to spoil a landscape composition, but looking beyond that, what I liked here was the gate, the fact that there was no snow on it. And again, the warmth and the colour of that contrasted beautifully with the blues of the shadows of the snow and in the sky.
The warmth, it looks freezing.
Yeah, but that's your initial reaction when you look at it. You see all that snow and ice, you think this is cold, and then you have that area of warmth in the picture, which I think makes it an effective composition. Same really applies here, where you've got this warmth just coming out of the snow and ice. An old bridge, similar contrasting colours here. This is Gulhern Castle. We tend to see it shot from the other side of Loch Awe, but this is down at the castle itself, and using late afternoon light in winter, as you can see. This was another visit to Loch Awe, This was early morning, and I'd spent about an hour shooting down there, and was about to pack up. In fact, I had packed my stuff away, and looked down the loch, and I could see there was fog down there, and it seemed to be coming in my direction. And so I thought, I'll wait a wee while, get the gear out again, and as it rolled up the loch, it obliterated all the background mountains, including the pylons, the power pylons, the houses, the roads, and just gave that lovely neutral backdrop to the trees on this this island. So, looking around yourself, being aware that the conditions can change. I believe that anticipation in landscape photography is just as important as it is in sports photography.
What's your favourite time of day that you go out to do your landscapes? Early morning,
It depends on
evening?
the light. Some folk are obsessed with dawn and dusk. In fact, you'll be told that it's only worthwhile taking landscape pictures first thing in the morning and last thing in the evening. But I believe landscape photography is about dawn right through to dusk. You can shoot at all times of the day. Admittedly, at dawn and dusk, things are a bit more exciting. The colours are great. You're revealing a time of day, especially early morning, that most people don't see, and that does make the pictures more eye-catching. But I enjoy my midday photography just as much as I do at dawn and dusk. It's a bigger challenge. Whereas at dawn and dusk, the light's doing the work for you. But in the middle part of the day, you have to do the work in terms of composition to offset the limitations in the light. This was a 16 to 35 shot again, something around about 16 to 18 mil perhaps, and I was attracted by the way in which you had it's almost like a window with the dark edge of the cloud along the top and its reflection along the bottom. And you get the feeling you're looking out some sort of window to the distant mountains. There were grads used in that, but not particularly severe, probably about a 2-stop grad, just to darken down the sky a wee bit. You don't want to make the sky darker than its reflection. Reflections are always darker than what is being reflected. So if I put a stronger grad on the sky there, if it was darker than the reflection, then it would look false. So I've just got the balance there about right. I mentioned about the merits of long lenses and picking up details. You don't have to walk up to the old manor store to take pictures of it. This was roadside, but taken at about probably 180mm focal length. Another shot, medium telephoto lens. And you mentioned just a short time ago about balance, and I think balance and composition is one of the key things that I always keep in mind. Identify what are the key components of your composition, and then how do you arrange them. You can't physically move them, but you, by moving your position, can put these elements into relative different positions. And so here the balance between the boat and the sun and its reflection, I thought achieved a decent composition. In this case, there's some degree of balance between the mountain and the trees on that small island, albeit that's quite small. I think even without the trees being there, the picture probably would have worked quite well. You may wonder why I've only got part of the house on the left-hand edge, but that was to avoid a blue car that was parked beside the house. And so if you've got justification in cropping your image, either at the time of taking or subsequently in Photoshop, in your processing, then by all means do it. And this was just to achieve a balance in the composition without having distraction of some sort of artificial man-made object like a car. This was a dusk shot, late afternoon in winter, last year past the winter there. This winter hasn't really existed, has it, for good winter landscapes. But it was taken at the time of day when you get the lovely earth shadow and the sky is blue towards the horizon, and it graduates upwards into these sort of mauves. And rather than taking a wide vista, I've taken a more selective shot, cut off the tree at the top there. I don't think you need any more of the tree. The bit of the sky that was most interesting is the bit I show you there, and so I would be able to defend that composition on that basis. It's a genuine moon. I don't know how to put moons into pictures in Photoshop. In any case, if you do put a moon in, you'd have to put its reflection in as well, which if you don't, it'd be a bit of a giveaway that it was a fix. This was in Mull. Bobby, you're going to have a great time next week. You're going to be going to Mull with all expectations of lovely light.
Yes.
But, and you may be rewarded. Evening, sun was well down, and it's just some of the turquoise, the lovely mauve colours that can exist in these twilight conditions.
Okay, this is my bit now. One of the key things that we've got in our new models that would probably aid in a lot of what Duncan's talked about is in our OLED viewfinder. Now, a few people I see have got Next 7s kicking about, so you'll probably really like the OLED viewfinder and like all the features and benefits of it. But the idea of the OLED viewfinder is it gives you 100% of the coverage. So in sample like shots like your landscapes, etc., you want to get the full picture in. So what you see through the viewfinder of our OLED viewfinders is actually what the sensor's seeing. So you're not needing to worry about anything getting cut off, etc. It's 100% coverage. So what you see is exactly what you get. Not only that, is if you start seeing shots like this with difference of lights, so obviously you're working in a lot of different lighting conditions, what you're seeing through the viewfinder is again exactly what the sensor's seeing. So if you're doing any effects of white balance, shutter speeds, apertures, anything like that, you're actually seeing that before you take the shot. So again, it's a lot quicker and a lot better to actually get the shot once, rather than, I would expect you a lot of the time you're taking and taking until you get the right shot. With that, you're actually seeing before and you instantly get that shot. A few other things actually, the on-screen display. I'm actually going to show you something that was actually quite key, because that's the reason why I asked you about if you use a tripod or not, because there's quite a nice display mode in the new OLED viewfinder on the Alpha 7765. The Next 7 it actually shows you a level gauge. There we go. Right, so that's what I've basically got up on the screen there just now. So you see it in the centre. It's actually a level gauge. So it actually shows you when I'm level. So all the green there, just like that, that's when I'm level. But if I'm off centre, forward, then I'm not level. So when you've not got a tripod, you're able to line it up and you know where your horizon is, and that's perfect, just like that. And that's all through the display. So like I was saying, you're seeing everything up on the screen and you're getting all this through the viewfinder, so it's a lot easier to control when you're there taking your shots.